Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. And what the hell is this? A third video this week? Preposterous, impossible, implausible. But yet it is, regardless. Yes, I am doing the impossible once again and bringing you a third video for the week. God willing, I may make my way to a fourth. But if you haven't been able to discern from the title, we are taking a look at the Haste spell and the next step of the Loremasters spell guide. And I had all the slides and information typed up for this almost immediately after the Fireball spell, but it just took some time to get around to, and, well, I'm making the time for myself, sacrificing some valuable video game time, I might add. Not that I'm actually expecting any praise for this, it's just this is actually a project I really want to succeed. I want to build this channel into something, so here we are. At any rate, I wanted to cover this because I do believe Haste is the overall superior spell in comparison to Fireball. There's just so much more benefit that you can get out of it, particularly when you consider, at least from third edition up through Pathfinder, there's so many creatures with fire resistance, as I'd mentioned before, but we'll break into the mechanics of that in a moment. For now, let's just dive into the origins of this spell, shall we? To start us off, like Fireball, Haste first appeared in Chainmail and then the original Dungeons & Dragons. In original Dungeons & Dragons, its description never really specified what it did. It's just that it was the opposite effect of the slow spell and is the counter spell. It's also been a third level spell in every edition from original Dungeons & Dragons on through 5th edition. So it's got a pretty long and storied history and has been with Dungeons & Dragons since its inception. Pretty cool, actually. At least I thought that was. Hopefully it was for you too. And anyways, as far as what it does actually, for the mechanics of it, again, 3rd edition through Pathfinder. Not sure about 4th edition, honestly, but then again, who really cares about 4th edition? I'm sorry if you do, but maybe we'll dive into that another time. The casting time was 1 standard action, close range at 25 feet plus 5 feet per caster level. The targets were 1 creature per level, no 2 of which could be more than 30 feet apart from each other. The duration was 1 round per level. Fortitude save could negate it, but it's harmlessly. I mean, why you would resist this, I have no idea. And spell resistance is also allowed and is a factor on this, but again, why resist? Just open up and let haste take effect. And specifically, what it did was affected creatures move and act more quickly than normal. When making a full attack, the target gets to make an additional attack at the highest base attack bonus. So, say your attack bonus is 13, you can make 2 attacks at 13, and then onwards down to your +8 attack, then your +3, or however the math ends up working out there. And then they also receive a +1 bonus to their attack rolls and dodge bonus to AC. All forms of movement are increased by 30 feet, maxing at double the creature's normal movement. So for a dwarf, that would max out at 40, whereas a human, that would be, they'd get the full 60 out of that. Jumping distance is also increased with this spell. It also dispels and counters the slow spell. And that's 3rd edition up through Pathfinder. For 5th edition, things change up a little bit, and again, we'll get down into the numbers and mechanics here in a moment to kind of emphasize why, but the casting time is 1 action, range is 30 feet, and the duration is concentration up to 1 minute. You choose a willing creature that you can see within range. Until the spell ends, the target's speed is doubled, it gains a +2 bonus to its AC, it has advantage on dexterity saving throws, and it gains an additional action on each of its turns. That action can be used only to take the attack, 1 weapon attack only, action, dash, disengage, hide, or use an object action. When the spell ends, the target can't move or take actions until after its next turn, as a wave of lethargy sweeps over it. So that actually greatly diminishes the effectiveness of the spell, because you're only able to do this for 1 creature. The duration's certainly a little bit longer, but it is a concentration spell, so it's one that you have to keep going, and Well, unless circumstances create a situation where you can only maintain one concentration spell at a time. So definitely a massive diminishment in its overall effectiveness compared to previous editions. But what about the numbers? What does that all break down to? Well, let's go back over to Fireball. Fireball does 10d6 points of damage. That's a minimum of 10, maximum of 60, and it's going to average out to 30 points of damage per target. Now, let's say you catch 12 targets in the blast. You're going to be looking at a minimum of 120 damage, maximum of 720, and an average of 360. And that's assuming that, all the targets fail. Reflex save for half damage. Some classes and creatures automatically take half damage even on failure and fully negate damage on success. So that really eats into the potential damage there. Can really reduce it by a lot. It's also affected by fire resistance, which 380 creatures have, at least in Pathfinder. Fire immunity, 330 different creatures have fire immunity, so that's over 700 creatures with some form of automatic resistance to outright immunity to fire damage. Also, damage reduction affects this, which I didn't pull together the numbers there, and spell resistance also affects this, which again, I didn't pull the numbers together there, and I would assume that there is some degree of overlap with all of those. So that really does a lot to hinder the overall effectiveness of the Fireball spell, well, depending on what you're fighting. If you're fighting things that have no resistance to fire, well, you still have to worry about reflex saves, and not only that, but opponents like rogues who can save and take no damage, or even if they fail, they still just take half. So here's where things start to get interesting. Let's just take a random fighter that I threw together. Attacks by Merrick Vol with a two-handed sword. 5th level fighter, 18 strength, blades, heavy weapon group training, weapon focus greatsword, weapon specialization greatsword, and the cleave feat. That's a plus 11 to his attack overall, 2d6 plus 8 points of damage, 19 to 20 times 2 damage on a crit. That's 10 damage minimum, 20 damage of a maximum, and an average out for 14 there. And you have a 1 in 10 chance to crit and double all of that. So, doesn't really seem like it scales all that much to begin with, looking at the numbers there. But let's see what happens when we apply haste to this overall. Under haste, attacks by Merrick Vol with a two-handed sword. 5th level fighter again, 18 for strength, etc., etc. That's a plus 11 to attack, 2d6 plus 8 on each hit. So we got a minimum of 20 now, maximum of 40, average of 28, again with 1 in 10 chance of critting. If he cleaves on both attacks, which if you're dealing with 12 opponents, he has a pretty damn good chance to cleave. And with Pathfinder and 3rd edition had some differences when it came to a lot of things. But cleave in particular, for 3rd edition, on cleave, you had to drop the target to 0 hit points or less, and then you could make another free attack against an adjacent target. With Pathfinder, all you have to do is hit the first target, and then you can make a free attack against an adjacent target. So cleave really starts to step up really nicely in Pathfinder. So with cleave on both attacks, that's a minimum of 40 damage, maximum of 80 damage, average of 56. Now, 5th level can affect 5 targets. Assuming Merrick has a twin, the numbers go to 80 points minimum, maximum of 160, and average of 112. Now, damage reduction can still reduce this overall, but you can start to see how this starts to overcome those limitations that Fireball has, because those creatures that have resistance and outright immunity to Fireball, and even then spell resistance, which might make the spell fizzle to begin with, that just doesn't happen with a physical attack. Now, there's all kinds of tactical movements and stuff depending on what you're fighting. They might teleport away. They might have a significant amount of damage reduction, like an Iron Golem, I believe, is a damage reduction of 20. But if you have an adamantium weapon, or even something that just produces an adamantine effect for your weapons, that overcomes that right there. You can't really do that very much with Fireball. Not against spell resistance, not against fire immunity or fire resistance, which, by the way, by the time you're 5th level, 8th level, you're starting to really find a lot of fire resistance. And say they fail their save, but they're the kind of creature or have the kind of class levels that allow them to save for to take only half damage even on a failure, the fire resistance is applied first. So if you did 60 points of damage, they fail their save, they're only taking 30, and if they have a fire resistance of 15, that's only 15 points of damage right there. And around level 8, 15 points of damage is not that much overall. But if you're taking a look at 2 hits from a fighter, from this particular fighter, Merrick Vol, that's a minimum of 40 right there, average of 56. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the cleave there, but let's assume there's 2 of these creatures. 56 points of damage pumped out there. Or if he has a twin, or, it's a ranger with a very similar build, you're looking around 110, 112 points of damage overall. That's nothing to sneeze at right there. That's with 2 characters right there, which is very easily done. And not only that, but the haste spell can also be applied to the caster. So the caster can move faster, have better defense, and get that extra action going out there. Granted, it's an extra attack action, but, maybe the DM might be willing to let you finagle things a little bit and have just the slight bit more of an edge. So it's not to say that Fireball's a bad spell either. I mean, seriously, looking at the numbers there, assuming you somehow do get 12 targets grouped up in that 20-foot blast radius, the damage potential is spectacular, but you're probably not going to have that. Usually, I think the highest I've ever seen in any of the games I've run or the like has been like 8. 8 NPCs in a direct combat situation. The only other time it's really been higher has been in siege battles, but then again, the wizard was firing into a column of troops, undead troops at that. So he burned about a dozen, maybe 14 zombies to a crisp if the DM was being nice, and created a nice fiery area, which cool, definitely worth something. But you're talking about a massive siege with an endless supply of targets. So again, it just. I should also mention a certain amount of this comes down to context. One of my favorite examples to use where Fireball is massively useful, much more useful than you'd expect, would be on a high seas campaign dealing with pirates and corsairs and the like. Using a Fireball spell, throwing that into the other ship's rigging, burning away their sails, burning away the ropes. I mean, hell, that's massively useful. Granted, any solid ship worth its salt, any solid pirates or raiders or whatever military action might be happening worth their salt is going to have a wizard on board that could try to counterspell that. But again, then, you're just devolving into other things, caster to caster fighting, as the cannons are firing and roaring out their devastating payloads. People are readying their bows, their muskets, everything. They're getting ready for that nice, heavy boarding action. But, again, all about context, really. But when you take a look at the mechanics here, the advantages and disadvantages, I really do think Haste is the superior spell to Fireball. Not that it's perfect, I just do think it is better. I mean, imagine the wizard slapping that down on 5 warrior types. Say there's a large enough party. Say you have a ranger, paladin, cleric, fighter. I mean, all 4 of those are plausible right there on top of having a wizard. I mean, they all going to town on people. I mean, a cleric with the right spell loadout can be an absolutely devastating fighter, and having a haste spell thrown down on top of them only adds to it overall. And hell, Ranger's also going to have an animal companion, so you could boost that animal companion too, and really up the damage output. All for the cost of 1 spell, whereas if you had this blasting spell, Fireball, maybe you wouldn't have done so great. But That's all for now. If you agreed with me, go down to the comments down below. Or if you want to argue and debate it, please do that as well. I'm more than happy to engage in discussion. Like I said, context is everything, really. There's plenty of situations where Fireball is massively useful. But I think overall, for most combat situations, Haste is going to be the better option. But let me know down below what you think. And if you liked today's video, well then let me know that too by clicking the like button down below. And if you've been enjoying things overall, then why not consider subscribing to the channel? Certainly would be happy to have you here. And speaking of subscribing and content and the like, there are going to be a couple of videos popping up over this way very soon. So click on those and definitely keep watching more content here at the Gamer's Den. But with that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.